Welcome to Living Chassidus. Together, let's live the Chassidus we learn.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Chassidus in the Morning. 15 minutes to change our lives. Kuntres Maamer, Chava, Perak base. Before we start, we're just going to focus today on Noi Bat Chava. The Mitzvah Hashem, everything should be good, healthy and safe. Should come home smooth, quickly. Whoa. Sorry about that. And yeah, come home healthy, smooth, safe. Only good for her and all the captives and all the soldiers and all the yidden Eretz Yisroel around the world. And also just have Mashiach. Okay, parak based. So we're going to discuss how, and this is a classical like yeshiva learning, understanding dynamics of things. So in general, when you look at something, there's different levels of the way you look at it. There's like the forest for the trees. You can look at the forest, look at the trees, you can look at the branches. And depending on where you're looking from is what you see. And this is what we're going to discuss in regards to Atzilus and how Atzilus is distinct from the other worlds. Let's see. Parak base. Bezehu Shamar Rabbeinu Nishmas Ed Nisad Alter Rebbe said, the yes imash ein arich asiya lagabe Atzilus ein arich Atzilus lagabe Ein Sof. More is infinitely no ein arich in asiya to Atzilus. It's Atzilus to Ein Sof is even more. Meaning, and this is sort of what we're talking about. Like when you look at in our four worlds, and that's like sort of the whole bubble. That's what you're looking at. So Atzilus and Asiya are like the opposite extremes. You can't have anything further. But when you zoom out and you look at the whole dimension of everything, including Ein Sof, so then Atzilus and Asiya are much closer. And again, it's depending on where you're looking from. When you're looking from just Atzilus and Asiya, so they're very distant from each other, and they are. But when you zoom out and you add in Ein Sof, so then the distance between Ein Sof and Atzilus is greater than the difference between Atzilus, or the distance between Atzilus and Asiya. Our world to Atzilus is closer than Atzilus is to Ein Sof. Even though our world to Atzilus, in general terms, when we talk about just the four worlds, they're the opposite sides of the coin. They're the opposite sides of everything. And that's what he's saying. Why is Atzilus so far removed from Atzilus Ein Sof in comparison to Asiya? To Atzilus is closer, because ultimately Atzilus Ein Sof doesn't have spheres. Spheres Atzilus heim k'muhus chadash mamash, and therefore when you come from Ein Sof and you suddenly you have Atzilus, which has spheres, it's a whole new thing. It's a brand new idea. And therefore his abus spheres Atzilus meir Ein Sof. Therefore, the creation of the 10 spheres in Atzilus that's coming from the Ein Sof, al yedei tzimtzum u'makom panui, through the tzimtzum and the makom panui, we'll discuss this in a second. Shehu inyan hisalmus harishin, which is the concealment of the original light. Legamri. And then it becomes like something that's not from its essence, meaning like this. Before everything came into existence as we have it, and Atzilus, it was only godliness. And again, everything that we're going to say is only from our perspective. By God, everything that happened is all part of Him, because in the beginning there was only Him. Even the concept of the same beginning is a creation from Him. but we'll keep it simple. So you have, in the beginning, there's God. And then he wants to make a world that ultimately, our world, that field itself is separate from him, that he can be a king, and we can have a relationship, and we can do mitzvahs, so we can provide nachas for him, and things like this. So the first thing he needed to do, also saying he needed to, is also, but we'll keep it simple. The first thing he needed to do was make a makam pani, a void place, an empty place that you could start. It's like an empty canvas. You want to paint? The first thing you do is make an empty canvas. Have that empty canvas. That's called the tzimtzum rishon. And that, what does it do? We say it's almost it's removal of the lights. The example that Chassidus gives generally for this is like a teacher wanting to teach. So yes, you have a teacher that knows all the halachas of Yom Tov, yeah? Everything, Purim's coming up, they know everything about Purim. And they want to teach a little kid in preschool or pre-nursery. So a 3-year-old in pre-nursery. So in order to be able to teach them something, anything they're going to give is going to be overwhelming to the little kid in pre-nursery. So what the first thing they have to do is do with this tzimtzum. They got to take away everything, all the ideas and all the things they know, and all the halacha and the chassidus and then the lading and everything they have, remove it, so to speak, put it to the side. And now they're going to say, who is this child? How old are they? What can they accomplish? And based off that, let me put something in. So basically 99.9% of all the learning, all the knowledge a person has, the teacher has, all goes away, gets removed, and what comes is only the 1%. And the only way they can figure out the 1% is looking at the kid. That's the marshal that's used for tzimtzum rishon. And then once you have that, and therefore what you have coming out of it is totally different. That little kid is not, there's no way for that kid to go from what they've been taught to understand everything the teacher has. They're two separate things. It's totally removing the light to feel totally separate. Aval, Asiya, so that's, and that you could, so to speak, compare Atzilus to Ein Sof. What comes before the tzimtzum to after the tzimtzum is totally different. It's totally different. But if you're going to contrast this idea to Atzilus and Asiya, Yesh la erech v'yachas. They have some relationship. Because on one hand, you're going to say Atzilus is so different and so separate. It's a world full of godliness, whereas Asiya is a world full of separateness from God. But nevertheless, they have so many characteristics that are the same. They have both the worlds. They both have spheres. They both have chachma. They have bina, das, chesed v'tferes. They have all these levels. It could look very different, but they still have levels. There's some. Even if you don't speak the same language as someone, but they have a language. There's a language, and ultimately, even if you don't speak the language of, like, someone speaking Chinese and you don't speak Chinese and they don't speak English, there's some relationship that you can build. You can figure out the way they're talking, the way they're acting, what's going on. There's something there, and that's, so to speak, Atzilus and Asiya. They're very different. We don't understand each other, but there's some relation. If so, therefore you can't say the Chachma of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, the low three worlds, Hu Mahus Chadash Mamish. We can't say that the Chachma of Asiya or Bria, Yitzira is a totally different thing than Chachma of Atzilus. Shaharei Kvar Yesh Bechinas Chachma Gam Atzilus, because even in Atzilus is Chachma. So therefore, it's for Shegam Bechinas Chachma, the Bris and Asiya, Kulu B'Chachma Atzilus. And therefore, you have to say the Chachma in the low three worlds are included within the Chachma of Atzilus. Because they're also Chachma, and Atzilus also is Chachma. So they're all Chachma. V'rak shehi Bechinas Madregas Al Yena V'Yadua. The Chol Madregas Al Yena Kilel P'Sechel Kol Mash L'Matim Menu. So So the only difference is that in Atzilus, it's on a much higher level. And like it's known that everything that's below comes from above. So where did the Chachma of Asiya come from? Chachma of our world, it comes from the Chachma of Atzilus ultimately. So ultimately, like we said in the beginning, when you're just focusing on Atzilus, between Atzilus and Asiya in our world, so they look very, very different. But when you come back, and you know, in everything it has it's matter what you're focusing on. So when you're focusing on that, yeah, they're very different. But when you go back, step back, and you see Eretz Yisroel, and you saw before the Tzimtzum. So these two worlds, Atzilus and Asiya, they're much closer. They have relationships. They have some connections. Some things that they go together. Veishavus hachachma debriyatzin Asiya mechachma Atzilus hu b'derech ishtalshus ilvalu, and also the way it comes from Chachma of Atzilus till Chachma of Asiya is through a process called Ilav Alu, cause and effect. Cause and effect ultimately means that the effect is based off the cause. There's a relationship. They go together. Yesh Ma'ayin, in contrast, is something from nothing, meaning that you don't see your source. How did you get here? It's like, you follow a train of thought and then you understand how you got to that place. They all base it off each other. Whereas yesh ma'ayin, you can't look. You're a yesh, and your source is the ayin. You can't see it. You don't know how your source comes about. So il v'alu means that the chachma that we have in our physical world is coming ultimately from the chachma of Atzilus. Like we said, the physical sweetness of the apple is coming from the chesed of Atzilus. Ella shechachma debriya yitzira asir nika shel tulda. But we call it Or Chadash, a new light, and like a tulda, like an offshoot. Because the way it looks is very different than the way it is in Atzilus. When it's in a parsa, and the way it came back to the low three worlds was through this parsa, through this curtain that covered it. Like we explained before, like we're going to bring it down again, it's like a mushroom. But ultimately, as much as maybe we will not be able to see the source of the Chachma of Asiya coming from Chachma Atzilus, but the reality is that's what it is. And the idea of that parsa that we talked about, that is like that curtain between the low three worlds and Atzilus, that curtain is like a mushroom. That a mashal is very different than nimshal. The nimshal is something you're trying to teach. Like we said here, like what does it mean? The nimshal is that lifnei at tzimtzum, the difference in lifnei at tzimtzum and achar, tzimtzum and rishain. So we have this mashal of the teacher and the student. Now that mashal teacher and the student is very different than the reality of the light of Hashem before He made the tzimtzum, and Hashem after made the tzimtzum. They're very different ideas, and they're very different. It has some relationship in the concept to make you understand it, but you can't. But you wouldn't say, just like a teacher teaches and has the whole process. It's the same thing. It's the Eretz Yisroel at tzimtzum is a way higher level, so it's above and beyond. So the parsa, it is making a very big difference between the low three worlds and Atzilus. And again, we're showing on one hand Atzilus and Asiya close, but they're not so close. But they're closer than Atzilus is to Eretz Yisroel. And like I said before, a few times, that it's like you're painting a picture. Before you might have known there's a thing called Atzilus and there's a thing called Bria Tzin Asiya. Okay, they're nice. There's worlds. There's four worlds. Atzilus is a higher world and Asiya is a low world. Then we explained that really Atzilus and Asiya on different spectrums. Atzilus is as much as it's a world, its whole being is godliness. Whereas Asiya, our world, its whole being is separateness from God. And then we added, but you have to realize that as much as As much as we are very different than Atzilus, but we're closer to Atzilus than Atzilus is to the Ein Sof living at Ein Sof. That the infinite light of Hashem is way above. Why? Because as much as we seem much more separate than Atzilus, but us and Atzilus have common characteristics. We're worlds. We have Eretz and Kelim. They have Atzilus has Chachma. We have Chachma. He said, but together with that, we have to also understand there's a parsa, there's a curtain that separates between Atzilus and the lower three worlds. So don't get too comfortable. Atzilus is still separate. It's, as they say, it's same, but different, or different, but same. And that's what we're showing here. Mitzvah Hashem to be continued tomorrow as we go through this process, and hopefully this is bringing more clarity to these concepts. And therefore, when you learn this, you start to understand God take on a bigger form. He's not a stick figure anymore, so to speak, lo mashal, but it's, the painting becomes greater and more depth to it. And Mitzvah Hashem should be continuing. Have an amazing day.